going to be a big show this week. We're going to be interviewing Marc Espie about OpenBSD's package system and build cluster. Also, we've been asked many times, how do I keep my BSD box up to date? Well, today's tutorial is finally going to answer that. So, of course, answers to all your emails and this week's headlines on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 43, Package Design, recorded June 25th, 2014. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Glad to have you guys with us this week. We got an exciting show, lots to talk about, so we're going to get right into our first headline. So first up, EuroBSDCon 2014. Looks like they've released the talks and schedule for what will be upcoming later this September. So interesting couple cool notes here. Opening keynote's going to be called FreeBSD. Looking forward to another 10 years by Jordan Hubbard.
Yes, it'll be nice to hear Jordan speak. I haven't actually got to hear him speak before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I've heard him speak publicly.
I guess he's been back for about a year now, and he's had time to get caught up and figure out what's going on. So.
Yep, so that's going to be a lot of fun, and there's a whole bunch of other talks in there too.
Yep, the next
looks
one
like I'm speaking right after.
Yes, right after him. You got you talking about snapshots, replication in boot environments, BSD and ARM, Dragonfly, improving performance of Postgres SQL on Dragonfly.
Yep. And McCusick doing a ZFS
introduction. That was an interesting one. I guess.
Yeah, I was surprised when I saw his name on that. But that's really cool. I want to hear that.
He spent quite a bit of time with Matt Aarons getting the internals of ZFS sorted out for the book, and I guess now he's ready to give that back to us. And that'll be interesting because most of the information I've learned about ZFS has all been from the sysadmin side, less from the actual implementation side. So it'll be interesting to get into the nitty-gritty in there.
Cool. Well, I always enjoy Kirk's talk,
exactly.
So I'm really looking forward to that one. And just as a personal note, I'm really happy that I'm giving a talk in the very first segment because nothing's worse than going last.
I know. I went last
conference and sweating it the whole time, and then now I'll be able to go get it done, and then you'll be there, right, Alan? Okay, so we'll get it done, then we can go do interviews right after.
Exactly.
Unless you're speaking.
I'm not this year, so
okay.
Because my first EuroBSDCon, I was the very last talk. And then in Malta last year, I was second to last.
Yeah, and I've done both sides of it. Trust me, it's just better to get it done at the beginning.
Although
then you relax for the rest of the conference.
I felt bad for one of the OpenBSD guys because his talk was up at the same time as Kirk McCusick in one room and Scott Long about Netflix in the other room. I was like, wow.
Tough break.
Yeah. But also NetBSD rump kernels, developing software in a hostile environment by Ted Unix from the LibreSSL and a bunch of other interesting stuff at OpenSSL.
Yeah, that's cool. Yep. Optimizing Jelly performance by John Mark Gurney and taming OpenBSD network stack dragons. That sounds interesting.
Yep. Fuse stuff. OpenBGPD. That one looks similar to the one we saw at BSDCan. Then there's iSCSI, the OpenBSD way. The new MPF, which is the NetBSD's firewall, and scripting it with Lua, which is definitely interesting. A firewall that can be a little more adaptive like that might be really cool.
Yeah, that is really neat.
Octeon networking gear for OpenBSD and reimplementation of NetBSD based on microkernels. That's only the first day, and that's while there's another track going on of FreeBSD Developer Summit reports. So who knows what we'll have happening there? I mean, those are always interesting too. Yeah. And then we have.
But next day, we start off with software segmentation offloading for FreeBSD, high-speed, secure, and reliable services for Turkish NREN with BSD, bugs. Let's see what else. Then SmartComm's control plane software, a customized version of FreeBSD. Then LibreSSL that Ted Unix is also giving. Yeah. And porting NetBSD to the Lattice Micro 32 open source CPU.
That's interesting. And then they have OpenStack and OpenContrail for FreeBSD. And then just
one titled Theo.
I guess Theo hasn't decided what his talk is going to be about yet, or the topic of his talk is secret. One of the two.
Oh,
I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, you'll have to be there to find out.
Yeah. And then they have just-in-time code generation for NetBSD. And then Sean Webb giving an update on his ASLR work. That was a very popular talk at BSDCan. Tool chaining the Hydra, the ongoing quest to modernize the tool chain in NetBSD. Porting Valgrind to NetBSD and OpenBSD.
Cool.
The entropic principle. Do they need dev urandom and NetBSD?
Sweet.
And then Ed Mast is giving a talk based on his work to port the LLDB debugger to FreeBSD to replace GDB. And then Marc Espie is giving a talk about parallel make, working with legacy code. And then they have
very cool.
Secure lazy binding, sorting sensitive and restricted data. Dag Erling is giving a talk based on how can you do big data analysis on data that you're not allowed to look at.
Sure.
So it's he works at a university and they're dealing with like patient data from a hospital or something, and so they need to be able to do analytics and science on the data, but while at the same time not actually be able to view certain patient data and so
what
on.
It is, yeah.
And so he designed or helped design a system for that. It looks really interesting. And then finally, there a talk from Dragonfly about porting the DRM KMS graphics drivers from FreeBSD to Dragonfly.
I may actually sit in on that one.
Yeah,
that one sounds interesting.
It's nice to see some Dragonfly stuff happening. They got 2 talks in here. We don't often get those guys to come out to the conferences.
Well, that's great that they're coming out and giving a talk. So that's fantastic.
And then
cool.
There's also a closing keynote, which is different. Normally, the way they did it last year at EuroBSDCon was there's an opening keynote each of the first 2 days, and this one they have a closing keynote instead, which is interesting. I guess that's how they did it at Poland as well. But anyway, he's giving a talk about submitting documents anonymously.
Okay.
And then
that's a pretty full schedule for just 2 days there, Alan.
Yes, and the 2 days before that, there's actually stuff going on as well. There's the FreeBSD Developer Summit invite only, but yes, there's also tutorials. Kirk McCusick giving his introduction to the FreeBSD operating system, and Peter Hanstein doing building the network you need with PF. And then Kirk's thing goes all day, and then in the second half, in the second class, there's Subversion for FreeBSD developers.
Oh, cool.
Which is interesting. Yeah. And then on Friday, there's an introduction to Kirk's thing goes on for 2 more days. It's a whole semester university course condensed down into 2 days.
That's incredible.
And then Peter Hanstein's giving transitioning to OpenBSD 5.6 because there's a lot of changes there. And then Ingo Suarez is giving let's make manuals more useful. I'll talk about man pages and stuff. So if you're interested in docs and stuff, that'd be a really interesting tutorial.
So basically, it's 4 days, all BSD stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, if you grok this kind of stuff, you will be in heaven. You got to make an effort to get out there. It's going to be September 25th to the 28th in Bulgaria.
Yes, which was in the news recently for being the second cheapest place to vacation in Europe.
See?
It's got the cheapest prices for hotels anywhere in Europe.
So you need to get out there. I already booked my plane tickets. I'm not sure about hotel yet. I need to look at that.
I got to get my hotel sorted out as well.
Yeah. I'm not sure if they had updated the website yet.
They do have the list of hotels and stuff and all the paperwork for it, yes.
Okay, well then I'm going to get that booked right away.
Yes, but, especially since we're telling people about it, they're going to go and steal all the slots.
That's right. So we'll go book our stuff right after the show. Yeah. But again, September 25th to the 28th in Bulgaria. So if you can get out there, we'd love to see it. We'll be there in person.
Yep.
Okay, so what's our next headline for the week, Alan?
Next, Ars Technica, which is a fairly well-respected tech blog, did a shootout between FreeNAS and NAS for free.
Okay.
And they kind of compare the 2 different software, and the FreeNAS is nicer, more modern web interface versus NAS for free is more basic, old-fashioned HTML interface. And kind of talk about them. It goes on for 8 pages. I read through the whole thing. Yeah. It is a long article, but a good article. Yeah,
and
they really like the plugin system that FreeNAS has and stuff. But
the consensus seems kind of that the FreeNAS definitely has more power under the hood with some of the stuff you can do with it for sure.
Yeah, like running an own cloud or Plex media server, which is everybody's after that. The only thing they didn't really like was sometimes the FreeNAS GUI is a little hard to get used to. There's a lot of buttons and a lot of stuff is buried in sub menus, but there's a lot of buttons. You can't just put them all right there. Otherwise,
yeah, there's a lot of options and features you need to have access to somewhere.
And
those are good.
For NAS for free, the one thing they definitely didn't like was no built-in ZFS replication, which FreeNAS has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely something you're going to want if you're storing a lot of your data on one NAS and need to store it somewhere else safely.
Yep.
But it's a good article. It goes into release cycles, features, interfaces, the ease to use factor of each project. So we recommend you take a look at the link, click on it after the show, and see what you think. It's definitely very insightful, especially if you're not familiar with either project and want to kind of get your feet wet.
Yeah, so if you're sitting here wondering which one should I use, maybe reading through this will help you a lot.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay, well, next up, we have a cool article this week from Poul-Henning about quality software costs money and Heartbleed was free. That's a good, catchy title there. But Poul-Henning writes an article for ACMQ about open source software projects funding efforts. Yep. And this is a fascinating article. I spent a lot of time and read through this.
Yeah, I read the kind of blog post he did that eventually turned into this article. This article is much longer than the blog post and goes into much more detail, but it talks about everything from the fact that, do you have a new TV? It probably runs NetBSD, FreeBSD, or Linux. Right?
Sure.
Or, the multifunction printer you have in your office, or the
running some
entertainment console in your car or in your living room. And, we had this Heartbleed issue, and while there are still some servers out on the internet that aren't fixed, most are, but I'm guessing most TVs never get updated. Exactly.
Yeah. And even if they did, how many people are going to connect their TV and apply the update and take care of it?
And well, the TVs sometimes will actually have an update because they're interested in getting new features out to the TVs and so on. Certain appliances, like a printer, you're probably not going to do a firmware update on your printer.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that is true. So it's a fascinating article, but just talking about the software development model, and it does take money to maintain these kind of things.
Exactly.
He kind of dissects what happened over at the OpenSSL project with Heartbleed.
Well, yeah, but the thing over at OpenSSL was, sure, there's lots of people working on OpenSSL, but they're each being paid by their employer to implement the feature the employer needs, and there's no one actually doing the cleanup or just the regular maintenance type stuff.
The audit of the project as a whole, looking for these kind of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, or just reviewing patches before they get accepted. And so he goes into talking about why open source software needs money and how to get it. And he talks about his experience with his first experience with crowdfunding back in 2004, before that was really a thing.
Before it was the cool thing.
Yeah. He had to do it all himself. There was no Kickstarter website back then. And he talks about the problems he ran into with that. People sending him more money than he wanted. and just he found himself working too hard, working 80 hours a week because he felt he owed it to the people that had paid, and burning himself out. And so when he tried it again in 2010, he structured it quite a bit differently. It's like you email him and say you're interested, and then he'll send you an invoice so that he can rate limit the amount of incoming funds, and he controls how he works on it. And so he talks about his model with the varnish moral license, he calls it, and how that worked and how that's gone over the last couple of years. Because he's been doing it since 2010. He worked, 950 hours each year.
Dang. Yeah.
Except for in 2012, where he only worked about 600 because he was spending most of his time building a FreeBSD-based system to manage the European Southern Observatory's extremely large telescope.
Yes.
He's like, there's no way I was turning that down. It was a really cool project. He talked about it at EuroBSDCon last year.
Well, a good summary I like that TJ put here is, the latest Heartbleed vulnerability should teach everyone that open source projects are critical to the internet, but they need people actively maintaining them. Just because it's open source, that's great, but if it hasn't been updated since 2006 and vulnerabilities aren't being fixed, I mean, how many devices are pulling that code and distributing with that bug?
On my other podcast, TechSnap, we had looked at the UPnP code that's in a lot of embedded devices. And a lot of the manufacturers weren't updating it. So they'd make a newer version of the device, but they would just keep using the old...
Pull the old one.
It was a pre-release version of the UPnP server. And so it contained 6 years worth of known vulnerabilities that had been fixed. And they just didn't import the newer code because they didn't want to, disturb their code base.
Well, And it takes time and money. An engineer has to go through and bring it in, merge it,
and
fix it up to work the way they want. But still,
you would have
scary.
less of that if the guy whose job it was to make the UPnP feature in your product was involved in the open source UPnP project that he was using, so that maybe your changes got upstream, so it was easier for you to import it into your project and so on. But anyway, he talks about different ways to tackle that, and how different ones work in different situations and for different people, but how we have to do something like this, because it's leaving things the way they were is not really going to work.
No, the status quo is not good enough anymore. As Heartbleed pretty much demonstrated, this kind of stuff needs to change. But
and he talked about the FreeBSD has a foundation in OpenBSD and so on, and that works for larger projects. But some of the smaller projects, that's a lot of stuff, and depending on the countries you're in, the tax stuff gets really complicated, and it's for him it was just easier to accept money directly. And he's like, in a bigger company, it's just a line item you stick in there for as a miscellaneous software license or expert advice or consulting or whatever you want to call it. But it doesn't have to be complicated, or usually it's easier to get a company to pay for something like advice or consulting rather than to just donate money to a project or something. But yeah, it's a really good read, and I recommend people. It is
definitely. And of course, you can do your part too, donating to your favorite BSD foundation. I mean, even buying products and merch, if some part of that's going back into the foundation where they can pay people to do this kind of stuff and keep the ecosystem alive, so to speak. That's a good thing to do.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the focus the FreeBSD Foundation has been doing on which jobs they're actually funding. It's not the stuff everybody wants. It's the stuff that we need that nobody wants to do. Yeah.
Sometimes there's thankless tasks that just got to get done.
Yeah, like nobody really wanted. Nobody's like, oh, I really want to be the guy that writes the code to boot UEFI. But we really need that, so we pay someone to do it because it's the only way it's going to get done.
Cool. Okay, well, next up, we got a cool article about a geoblock evasion with PF and OpenBSD R domains.
Yeah, so normally if you're trying to spoof what country you're in, you use a VPN or whatever, but you'd have to end up routing all your traffic over that VPN, and that's not very helpful.
Not efficient, too.
Exactly. It'd slow everything else down or whatever. And the other problem is that, sure, that works on your computer, but if you want to watch Netflix on your PlayStation, you can't usually connect a VPN on your PlayStation. So this one talks about if you're using an OpenBSD router, how you can use R domains, which are basically additional routing tables. And you could say, most traffic goes out my regular internet connection, but traffic destined for these addresses should go through
this way
through the VPN, and you do that at the router, and that way your PlayStation or whatever device you're trying to do it on doesn't need the configuration. Your router does it.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, this article is pretty much a full-blown tutorial on how to set this up. So this is more than just a theoretical. And here's the entries. I mean, I would like to do this one as a tutorial at some point, Alan.
Yeah,
just to show people, because this is very, very helpful stuff.
I'd like to get a little bit of advice and clean up the configuration I did for myself yesterday. Now that I have two internet connections, I have one VLAN routed out one connection and one VLAN routed out the other connection.
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely cool. But, has, of course, their advantage not requiring browser plugins or DNS settings on specific computers. So, again, everything's handled at the router.
It makes it much easier, especially if the machine you're trying to use the Netflix on is an embedded device like a Roku or a PlayStation or your tablet or something. Instead of having to mess with the configuration on that, you can just
just connect to your network and away it goes. It's just transparent, which is what you want, especially if you have other people using it, like spouse and kids and others that don't know how to go in and change those settings.
Exactly. So you can see here he does a trace route to an Australian site, and it goes normally. And when he does trace route to Netflix, it goes through the VPN and ends up where it's supposed to, in such a way that Netflix believes he's in the States instead of Australia.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. You'll want to check this out, especially if you run into these problems, depending on where you're located.
Like Canada.
Yeah. So Netflix isn't blocked up there, is it?
No, we have Canadian Netflix, which just has no movies on it.
Oh, well, then yeah, that would be a problem. Well, I use it mainly when I travel, whenever I go to Europe. It's like, oh, I can't connect and watch my show now. That's a bummer. Well, cool. Okay. Well, we'll be back in a moment with our interview. But first, we want to mention, of course, our sponsor for the week, Tarsnap. And, of course, that address, tarsnap.com/BSD Now. And, if you've been watching the last couple of weeks, you've heard us talk about Tarsnaps. You probably know what it is, but we just can't stress enough how important it is that, A, you back up your data, and B, if you're going to back up your data, do it someplace secure. Do you really want to give those keys to the kingdom to just some guy down at the company where you're doing the backup, or a government agency, or whoever has access
that's
to that box?
The biggest thing with Tarsnap is that you don't give the keys to anyone, right? You generate the keys and you have them locally and you keep them safe and you're responsible for them, and then all the data gets encrypted and sent online. It uses Colin's deduplication thing, so it can detect changes, and it's basically, if you can use tar, you can use Tarsnap. And
correct.
Small incremental online backup, secure, encrypted on your system. Colin doesn't have to promise that he won't give your files to the government, because he can't, because they're encrypted.
He can't.
Exactly.
And that's, and the best part is it's a good service. There's none of this, cruddy monthly fee or anything like that, no fixed fees. It's based on usage. So if you're only backing up, small text stocks with private personal information in it, fine. You're not going to use very much a month. But, you can expand it, use as much or as little as you need.
So it's just 25 cents a gigabyte, and you just put in some money, and when you run out, put in more money.
There you go.
And, if you're just backing up your laptop, it's not going to take that much, and you're going to be very glad you had it someday.
Definitely.
And
so again, URL?
Go ahead. Sorry, the client is open source, so that's the other thing. You can download the source, compile it yourself, and know that the client is exactly what it says it is.
Sure. Yeah, don't trust.
Try to get that from some other backup service.
That is true. And how many other backup services offer, bug bounties in this way too? Or it's like, if you can find a bug which maybe will allow somebody to decrypt data, I think the bounty on that's like $1,000 or something. And so there's an incentive for people to be looking at this code to make sure it does what it's supposed to do.
And he also doubles the bug bounty on pre-release versions. So if you check out the beta and find a bug there before it goes out for release, you actually get double the payment, because he's incentivizing people to look for the bugs in the beta versions.
That is pretty cool. So again, that URL, tarsnap.com/BSD Now. Let them know that we sent you. We would appreciate that, and you will definitely be happy to know your data is backed up in a secure and safe manner. We'll be back in just a moment with our interview for the week. We're joined now by Marc Espie of the OpenBSD project, who's been a contributor over there. So glad to have you on the show today, Marc.
Glad to be here too.
Thank you.
Great. And of course, we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff. But before we get into that, just give us a little history on yourself. How did you first get into BSD?
Well, I think it started around 1998 or something like that, as far as BSD is concerned. Actually, I had been a Unix user before that. At the university, I used to play with Sun and stuff like that. Sure. And I had a weird computer at the time. I started on an Amiga, actually, and I tried to see what I could install to have some kind of Unix on it. And well, it turned out that OpenBSD was the only thing which had any kind of documentation that was actually clear enough for me to grab the necessary pieces and install stuff. Cool. There was some stuff about NetBSD, but lots of ways to install stuff. And when you don't really have a network and when you have to grab 50 floppies or so, you don't want to make any mistake. And well, don't get me started on Linux at that point. It was horrible.
Yeah.
So that's about how I started, and pretty soon, well, I started noticing some stuff which wasn't quite perfect. And the story goes that this guy, this Theodoret guy, told me on some email, well, you think you can do better? And I was a bit young and foolish, and I said, sure. And boom, you got an account, so let's start play with your gifts and stuff like that. And that's how it all started, actually.
So what do you currently do in the free OpenBSD project? What are your roles?
I do too many things actually, usually, but mainly I'm in charge of the port tree, let's say, and the infrastructure to build stuff and install packages and stuff like that. More generally, lots of stuff having to do with the build system. Like for instance, I'm manager for Make, Infor, and various little pieces in OpenBSD. Too much stuff actually.
Cool. How did you go from being a regular user to a developer, and then, of course, from developer to the head of ports and packages? What was that journey like?
Well, it's as for other developers in OpenBSD, I guess, which is that you start doing something, and at some point you realize that you spent so much time trying to explain to other people how things work. But well, it's much better if you get to commit stuff yourself, usually. Mm-hmm. And that's about how it went. At some point, I started playing with ports, and well, it was mostly based on my Amiga being too slow to do a lot of things, and so I started optimizing stuff. I was completely crazy, and, and I got sucked into ports and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Cool.
So could you give us some behind-the-scenes info about how the package building cluster was built and how you run it?
Well, actually, the most interesting thing about it is that I'm not the guy who is running it, but I get lots of bug reports about it, usually. Most of the machines are in Fio's basement, and we don't cross-compile anything. That's something about OpenBSD. We tried cross-compiling in the past, and we discovered that it really doesn't work for us. Mm-hmm. There are too many bugs, and we want things to actually run in the end. You can ask the guy at NetBSD, for instance, who managed to at some point discover that their VAX build setup was broken for 1 year before they actually noticed, because everybody was cross-compiling and what they were building was not actually running. Mm-hmm. So the most interesting thing is that you will end up with machines with lots of distinct CPU speeds, lots of distinct memory usage, and not the same number of CPU at all, and it all has to work about the same, more or less. That's the one point. We can't afford to have any odd architecture break apart at some point.
Yeah, so how do you manage all those different architectures and still try to build a consistent set of packages?
Well, the one important point is that we have lots of logs for everything that goes on. So when something breaks, usually my minions, the other package builder, are finding the bugs, and when it gets too complicated, they ask me for whatever was wrong with DPB, and I have all the information I need most of the time, which is probably the most important part. There was also one design aspect that you probably noticed when you try to run DPB, which is that it's set up so that when you start it, if there is any kind of problem, you will notice almost instantly. There was some former tool that some other guy built, which was well, a bit more orderly, which is that it started by scanning the whole tree and finding dependencies, and usually half an hour later it starts building stuff, and well, damn, yeah, you manage to set up something wrong and it falls on its face. And this is what we wanted to completely avoid with DPB, actually. So you start it, and as soon as it finds something that it can build, it will start building. So that saves a lot of trouble, because whenever you change some stuff, you just try it, and if you did something wrong, you'll notice almost instantly. The other important point is that if you have a slow machine, like say a cluster of Spark 64 machines, it will take over a week to build the full package tree. And so you don't want to babysit it all the time and stop things and restart from scratch. So one thing that DBB does real well is give you the ability to do hot fixes. Whenever something fails, you end up with a log file somewhere which says that, okay, this package did not build. and you can actually fix things in the port tree itself, remove that log file, and DPB will pick it up. You don't have to restart anything.
Oh,
so
nice.
in most cases, that will give you half an hour or more or time that you would not have if you had to stop everything and start from scratch, usually. So that helps a lot because package builders, usually they start a build, then they go to their day job and they come back in the evening. And when something fails, usually DPBA will start building all the other packages, of course. But you can try to fix the errors and keep going without having to restart all the time. So that's really the most important part for slow machines, of course.
Okay. Well, so OpenBSD's ports and packages were originally based on FreeBSD. So could you tell us about some of the changes that were made and why they were needed as you guys diverged there?
Well, almost everything is different these days, obviously. The first change I did was because of that Amiga, which is that it was way too slow for what we had at the time.
Sure.
So I started removing stuff which wasn't really needed. There were lots of abstraction pieces that, okay, you can replace this part and that part with an external script, and most of the time you don't actually need it. So remove stuff that wasn't really tested, try to trim down everything else. And then there was this crazy idea that we could possibly give people binary packages that would work.
Sure.
We are talking about 2000, 2001, and this is about the time when we started actually having binary packages that would work. If you compare to FreeBSD, I guess that, well, you can say that you now have binary packages, but it's very recent. It happened only 2 or 3 years ago, actually.
Sure.
So when we decided to do that, we had to change a lot of stuff to be able to have reproducible builds, to avoid bugs, to make sure that what you install is what you built. And we had to redesign everything, basically, I guess. So this is about the point where we started looking at the package tools and realized that they were complete crap.
Sure.
Well, I can say that because the original offer said so as well. If you look at the comments that, I guess it was PHK, I think, or Bart, I don't remember. I think it's Bart. He said that, okay, I've been writing this code over one weekend and it's complete crap, but it's good enough for what it does. And when you look at it from a security point of view, for instance, it doesn't work at all. So this is when I started rewriting it for real. The main goal was, of course, to have something more that no other BSD had at the time, which is to be able to upgrade packages, actually.
Right.
And well, it took something like 2 or 3 years to finish the rewrite and add those parts, and then in maybe 2006 or so, we had the beginning of having packages with upgrades that worked.
So most of the new package tools are written in Perl?
Yeah.
So is there a reason why you decided to use Perl?
Oh yeah, there are lots of reasons. The main reason is that there was actually no choice, basically. Because
that's a good reason.
Yeah, you can't write it in C. It's completely crazy to be doing lots of string stuff in C and expect things to work. There's also the fact that it doesn't really have to be that fast. And if you want a script language that works everywhere, you don't have a lot of choice. Python is completely out of the question because as of now it doesn't work on machines without shared libraries. So if you had written the script in Python, then there would be no packages for VAX, for instance, and other architectures at the time, but some of them have got shared libraries in them. And also it wasn't part of the base system. It's an historical accident because OpenBSD got Perl along with what we got from BSD. but in the end, if you want to write something that bootstraps easily, having things in the base system is great.
Cool.
So
good.
Yeah. If you actually look at the way the tools are written, it's some very specific subset of Perl, more or less. It looks a lot like Smalltalk, actually. It's object-oriented, there's lots of dynamic stuff, and all the patterns I'm using are classic stuff from object-oriented languages.
Cool. Well, we talked a few weeks back with Ted Uangst about Signify.
Yeah?
Base set and patches are going to be signed now, and I want to ask, how did this affect your package system? What sort of changes were made to make this all fly?
Not that many changes, because the story was that the package system already had some stuff to sign packages before that. Mainly it was some external stuff. We have some people using OpenBSD who wanted to have some signed packages. So I designed some small code to be able to sign the packages using X509 signatures at the time. So that was actually in practice, in production, outside of the OpenBSD project. So the only thing that Ted Uangst did was write Signify, so give us a much simpler way to sign stuff. And I just had to write the glue to make package.add work with Signify, that's all.
Cool.
It was actually very little code. It took more time to refine the process and decide who was going to sign stuff, because, well, as you know, we're a bit paranoid about things. Yeah. So
policy probably took you longer than the code itself.
Oh yeah, definitely longer. But even for the prototype before Signify, the part that was most important was to decide where you put the certificates, which key you use to sign, and having that outside of OpenBSD, actually, having it used by people to sign their own packages, was a very good idea, because it gave me the actual parameters I had to use, what tweaks to use, so it could work outside OpenBSD, so that it didn't really depend on anything official, and that we did not have to hardcode anything.
Cool. So is there ever going to be a time when the stable and release get package updates with security fixes, kind of thing?
I think it's already happening, but more or less not by the main project, but the guys at MTier are already providing base updates, and I think that they're going to be doing packages as well. The fact that the system, the signature system, is not hard-coded to be only official means that you could just grab the public key from for packages for MTier, put it into your Signify directory, and then it would be transparent. You would recognize their updates as if they were official updates.
Is there anything users can help at the moment to help that process along?
Besides giving money, I don't think so.
Okay.
We always need some new hardware and stuff like that, so if you can help the project for anything, that can be cool. But as far as I know, MTier has said that they were going to do that, and maybe it's going to take time because of having the hardware and stuff like that, but that's worth it.
So I guess switching gears a little bit, where do you currently actually use OpenBSD day to day?
Well, for one thing, I use it when I teach, because it's a very good example of a unique system with lots of documentation and where most things are done the right way. I teach a bit of Unix systems programming with respect to security, so that helps a lot. And well, I'm also using it for, I wouldn't say day-to-day stuff, but it's on my desktop for watching videos, listening to music, writing text, writing code most of the time, and even some very simple games, usually. But I'm not a computer user who's using lots of stuff, so just having a web browser being the most complicated stuff I do is usually watch videos.
Cool. So is there anything else you want to mention? Stuff, interesting other things that you're working on that we can get a scoop on?
If you want some kind of a scoop, we are going to get faster updates in well, probably before 5.6.
Okay.
It's an idea that I've stolen from PCBSD actually, which is that when you have a package, you don't have to put everything in order. And since for signatures, we already have checksums for every file within a package. I have a scheme where I'm able to sort the files for the new package so that the files that didn't change will end up at the end.
Oh, nice.
So, for instance, if you were to update some monster like TechLife, you would probably end up with maybe sometimes 5% of the files which are changed.
It's usually a really small binary diff.
Yeah. And well, this is not going to use a diff on each file, but at least putting everything that doesn't change at the end of the package would help a lot. I've done some statistics on that, and say if you update every 15 days or so, you would end up using only 30% of the bandwidth or so for updates, as opposed to full updates. So it's really good. As usual, proof of concept works. There are a few details to figure out, make sure everything works. I don't know if you've noticed, but when we switched to signed packages, basically it was a non-event because almost nobody noticed anything. At some point you had some non-signed package, and 1 week later they were signed, and everything was still working.
That's the way it should be, just completely transparent.
This is always how we've tried to do things, and I see that in the end FreeBSD is finally going down that road, but is doing very good work with PackageNG and Poudrière. Well, it's getting some teeth grinding usually, but it's the way it should be. Things should just work. There's absolutely no reason these days to have knobs everywhere that you have to change. That's the Linux way of doing things. You have some rite of passage where if you haven't reconfigured your system so that it actually works, then you're a noob. So, but for all guys that use BSD, you just want some stuff that works.
Cool. Well, great. It's been fantastic having you on today, Marc.
Yeah, it took such a long time, sorry about that.
Oh, no big deal. We're glad to get you on. And we're back. That was a good interview, and hope you guys enjoyed it. But next up, we're going to go to our news roundup. But before we do, of course, we want to mention the sponsor for this week, IX Systems, of course. And they had several things happen, actually, this last couple weeks, including a new FreeNAS release. But let's start at the top here, I guess, Texas Linux Fest.
Yes.
So
I sent Drew Levine and Josh Smith went to Austin, Texas for the Texas Linux Fest, and I sent some pictures and reports about all the other stuff they went.
Yeah, it was neat to see pictures of the booth there. Andrew's talk. Looks like Josh Smith also did an introduction to PCBSD talk, which had quite a number of people in attendance. A lot of questions about the encryption stuff that just went out in 10.2, and of course the Lumina desktop, which is being developed on PCBSD. So that was pretty cool. And then, of course, Drew did a graphical ZFS management tools talk, which is pretty cool. A lot of people, especially at these Linux shows, ZFS is still kind of all the rage. So that was sound like an impressive talk there. But in addition to that, go ahead.
They said that Josh ran out of promotional goodies they sent. Everybody wanted their horns and stuff like that. And they also
that's a good problem.
Yeah, and they also managed to raise $190 for the FreeBSD Foundation.
Sweet. So a productive conference for them down in Texas there. In addition, though, this last week, IX Systems announced that FreeNAS 9.2.1.6 release candidate is now available. So this just came out. Of course, they're encouraging people to download it, test it. But some of the notables from this last week is Samba being updated to 4.1.8, Netatalk updated to 3.1.2, fixes related to system data sets, a new VirtualBox jail template, some fixes related to ZFS replication, a new NPR driver officially sanctioned by LSI for the LSI 12 gigabit SAS HBA.
That's that one was cool. Like a super secret, like beta quality one, and is now officially blessed and ready for production.
That is sweet. That is sweet. So they have a new experimental in-kernel iSCSI target. So that's cool too.
So, and in the menu now, when you do iSCSI, you'll have the option of the in-kernel one, which is newer, or the older one that's considered more stable. But the new kernel one is supposed to be faster. So giving people the option to try those would be good. And I guess the big shift here is that they've switched to doing the release candidates instead of the rapid revisions. So that we don't end up with 9.2.1.6.7.3.
Yeah. So hopefully this will clear things up a little bit for folks. But of course, that is available. So they're asking people to try it out, give them feedback. If there's no major problems found, they're hoping to release a 9.2.1.6 release in about 2 weeks. So of course, get your testing in. Let them know if you find anything right away. In addition to that, though, there was another conference this last week. Poor Drew went to both. She's busy.
But Southeast Linux Fest. And Drew was there, and also your brother Ken was there.
Yep. He was out there too and gave a talk about PBIs, how that works on 10.0, specifically the new 10.02, which we just released this last week. So that was pretty cool. And so there's some pictures here from Drew's talk, and Ken's slides are even available online. So you can take a look at that and see what's changed in PCBSD land. And of course, just some feedback from them about how stuff went at the conference, including ZFS with snapshot, restore, and replication was easily the #1 thing that people wanted to discuss at the conference. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, he mentioned that, Ken mentions that there were a lot of people at the conference, but unlike some other conferences, a majority of them were system administrators that work for businesses and organizations and stuff. And that's kind of, the target audience for a lot of this stuff. And so a lot of them were very interested in discussing ZFS. And so it was great that IX had people there to be able to talk about them and promote FreeBSD and FreeNAS.
That's cool. That is cool. Well, it sounds like another productive talk. And of course, this is all stuff that IX Systems does. They employ Drew, Ken, and Josh, and they get sent out to these conferences because IX Systems is willing to do that. So we cannot recommend them enough. I mean, aside from doing the conference circuit and being able to meet and talk to developers and employees over there, especially Drew. Poor Drew, she's at every single one of these.
Yeah, she goes to so many conferences.
Oh, yeah. But
it's like I really like going to conferences, but I couldn't go to that many.
Yeah. No, I think I cut mine back. Last year I did 13. I was like, that was too much for me.
Yeah, but it's like at that point, it's not fun anymore. I'm like, I would never want to go to so many that it wasn't fun anymore.
Sure. But that's just one small part of what IX Systems does for the open source community and why they're a good partner for the open source community. But in addition to all that, of course, they can fit and provide your needs, take care of your needs in the hardware space as well.
Yeah, I guess that's the biggest thing is that, they custom build servers however you need them. And that's the biggest thing is they're not just selling you what's ever on the shelf. They, talk to you when you're talking to them. It's not just some sales guy that has, a spec sheet or something. They're people that actually know about FreeBSD and hardware and will help you find the machine that will do what you need best and make sure that it'll work very, very well under FreeBSD.
Yeah, no matter how big or small. I mean, they've built some crazy monster systems, which we have highlighted over the past weeks, and they're always up to the challenge to do that.
I have a little 1U half-depth machine that they built for me that is the router for my new fiber connection.
Sure.
And it does a bunch of other stuff as well, but, it was a nice little small, quiet, cheap system, and then a couple months later, I bought a giant storage server from them. They're like 36 4-terabyte hard drives.
Yeah. So
the scale
no project too small or too big. Exactly. I mean, they can do those and everything in between. And of course, the best part is, since they're doing that, it's going to be specific to your needs. I mean, it probably wouldn't have been as useful, Alan, if they had just shipped you something and you're like, no, I want a quiet one for my router.
Like a half depth, but I still needed I needed to have 4 gigabit Ethernet ports, which is, not something you normally get in a quiet, low power system.
Sure.
Or, even the other system they built just a couple of weeks ago for me, it was, I have all these cheap SATA hard drives and I need to stick them in a good server with dual power supplies and stuff. But they're SATA, so I don't want a SAS expander to get in the way and make a mess. And they're like, well, we have this direct attach version. You'll have to buy an extra HBA because you'll need 12 ports instead of 8. But I'm like, yeah, that's fine. That's what I want.
Sure.
And they built it for me, and it's going now.
That's very
it's
cool.
Slurping down the entire internet over the fiber.
Yeah, rub it in, Alan. Rub it in. That's cool, though. Well, of course, we want to mention the URL, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. Go there, fill out the form, download the free guide to purchasing a server for open source, the things you need to know, and dealing with vendors. And, of course, let them know that we sent you. We would appreciate that. And, of course, they're always excited to hear from BSD Now fans and listeners.
Yep, that ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source is very good material for convincing you management on why you should use IX as well. We assume you're already convinced. It's just, maybe you don't have the checkbook. So use that. And
here's some of the management speak you need to know to be able to justify this.
Pretty pictures and the brochure that they're expecting, right? So when the other guys have a brochure, you need a brochure. So
that's right. That's right. Well, cool. Well, we're going to get right into our weekly news roundup. So again, before we do that, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. Let them know that we sent you. Yep. So what do we got first in the news here, Alan? It looks like some more SSL information.
Yeah. So this is from a guy that works at Google, and he said earlier this year, before Apple had the go-to fail in their SSL implementation, and GNU TLS had a bunch of its own problems, and then we had Heartbleed, and he's like, wow. Even if you weren't using OpenSSL, no matter what, you were getting hit on every front from SSL itself. And he said he had started to tidy up the OpenSSL code that they use at Google. And he says at Google they have a number of patches, about 70 that apply on top of OpenSSL, and they've been maintaining those for years and trying to make them keep working with OpenSSL. But he says
they decided to stop doing that and just straight up fork, right?
Yeah, so basically what they've decided that instead of having their patches and keep trying to apply them on top of the latest OpenSSL, they're going to take the latest OpenSSL, put their patches on it, clean it up, and then from then on, they will import the changes that they need from OpenSSL into their version.
They've tagged or dubbed this boring SSL?
Yes, so the name is aspirational. They're not yet promised that that's the name they'll get to keep. But the big differences with boring SSL is that there's no guarantee of API or ABI stability. Unlike Libre SSL, they're not going to worry about it working with existing applications. It's for Google, and it'll do their thing only.
Google-specific stuff.
Yeah, and they hope that it's starting to appear in the Chromium repository now, and they're hoping to actually use it for Android as well.
Oh, nice.
On top of the Google services that they've been using it as well. So it's interesting to see, that reversal and how easy they'll have a time of keeping up with OpenSSL. When you're taking the latest OpenSSL and applying your patches on top, it's sometimes easier because you know what your patches are supposed to do and you care about making them work. When it's going the other way, it's like, well, so there's this change to OpenSSL, and maybe we don't quite understand what it does as fully as we understand what our patches do, and so, but then again, at the same time, they might have 2 years, if they were doing this 2 years ago, they might have seen that heartbeat feature and been like, we don't need that, so we just won't include that in our version, and then they wouldn't have been heartbeat.
Prevented some of the pain.
So yeah, anyway, it'll be interesting to see Chromium, and Android moving forward with their own version of SSL instead.
And we have a link here where you can browse the source code now. It's at boringssl.googlesource.com. So you can take a look at that, see what it's starting to look like. And related to this, Theodor Rad also weighed in with how this effort relates to Libre SSL. And a couple things he talked about also is the portability of Libre SSL. What's happening there. So there's basically some misinformation being spread about the effort to get it out the door.
Yeah, a lot of
that he's addressing.
Well, like even on their website, they say porting it isn't a high priority, and you'll just have to wait a while, and then you can have Libre SSL on Linux and FreeBSD and so on. But he goes on to say, we're not purposely trying to make it hard to port. At this point, all they need is a clean build framework to deal with the things that are different on the different operating systems, and
Sure.
making portable versions of some of the secure functions they use, like arc4random, stirl copy,
Explicit
stirl cat.
B0, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so once those are done, it shouldn't be that hard to port.
He says it's a small step. I don't think it'll take much longer. Patience.
Yeah.
So hopefully in an upcoming episode, we'll be talking about the portable version of LibreSSL here. But it's coming, and they are working on it. It'll happen when it's ready.
But in general, it's nice to see us moving away from this monoculture where maybe in the future everything won't be OpenSSL. Although if it's boring SSL and LibreSSL that are based on OpenSSL, there's a good chance it'll have the same problem, and that won't quite get us where we want. But over time, they'll diverge, I think.
Over time, they'll diverge a little bit more and hopefully avoid some of that.
Yep.
So cool. Okay, next up, we have a interesting post here asking about more BSD Tor nodes wanted.
Yes.
So that's interesting. But a friend of the show, Mikala, posts some news to the Tor BSD mailing lists about the monoculture of the Tor network being both bad and dangerous, which is a really good point. I'm glad
and
you noticed that.
It's kind of what we were just talking about with the SSL, is that if everybody's using the same stuff, if there's a problem with that, then everybody's in trouble. And so in the case of Tor, like we've seen every once in a while, there's a Linux root exploit or something. And if every Tor node is vulnerable to that, especially if it's not one that's been announced and fixed yet, if the NSA finds an exploit or something, then if everybody's running the same code to run their Tor relay, that's a bad thing. And so
very bad thing.
The EFF is having a Tor challenge where they're trying to get people to commit to running a Tor relay for at least a year. And a bunch of stuff like that. So they're trying to promote people using any of the BSDs to run a Tor relay, just so that it's not all Linux Tor relays out there.
90% of your nodes are on the same OS, and like there's a problem in the crypto stack or something like that.
Exactly.
It could be a big deal. So
exactly. That's why companies like Verizon, VeriSign. Yes, VeriSign. They purposely use Solaris, Linux, and FreeBSD for their infrastructure, so that if there's a problem with one, they still have the other two still going.
That's just the smart way to do it. So, of course, we want to mention that we had a Tor tutorial we did a while back, and we'll have the link here in the show notes. So take a look at that if you want to see how you can help out the network.
I wonder if TJ updated the example for that so it doesn't use our email address in the example config.
Oh.
People wouldn't change that, and we got like 20 sign-up emails after that tutorial.
Oh, nice. I don't know if he did. No, it looks like, feedback at bsdnow.tv.
Yeah, he should fix that.
We'll have to change that. Insert your email here.
Yes.
Oops. Cool. Yep. Well, next up, we have a cool tutorial. It's more of, I guess, a tutorial than an article about FreeBSD 10 OpenStack images.
Yes.
So this is pretty cool. And again, something I'd like to see us do maybe as a tutorial down the road. Maybe we can borrow this. But it's going to walk you through how you can roll FreeBSD OpenStack images, configuration of them, everything down to package setup, etc.
Yeah, so it kind of talks about... basically, these are cloud images for FreeBSD, and using the BSD Cloud Init package to make the virtual machine do what it needs to do when it first starts up and all that stuff. And it walks through the examples of basically taking a FreeBSD 10 install ISO, building a glance image with it, and pushing it up into the cloud.
Yeah, after you've done that, converting it for use with the BSD Cloud Init setup as well. So that's really cool. And I guess the author of the article is a regular show listener and emailer of the show. Cool. So again, if you wouldn't mind us turning this into a full-blown tutorial we can do, of course, we'll give you credit for the original. Let us know. That would be really cool, and I think people would find that interesting.
Also, I would just look at doing something similar to this to make it easier to deploy FreeBSD in Beehive as well.
Very cool. Okay, well, next up in our roundup, BSD Day 2014 has just issued a call for papers. So this is, I guess, I don't know if it's new. It's created in 2008, but this is the first I heard of it that I recall.
I don't think it's run every single year.
Okay.
Well, there's a BSD Day in Europe as well. I don't know if they're related.
Well, this one's going to be held August 9th in Argentina.
Yes, at
so that's
Buenos Aires University.
Yeah, that's the only BSD conference we know of that's even around that area. So if you're in that part of the world, in Argentina or someplace where you can get to there easily, consider submitting a talk. They just issued their call for papers, and they're looking for folks to come out and give some interesting talks for BSD users and enthusiasts in that area.
Yes, so they're looking for papers and anything else people want to present at the conference, and they say this conference is in the past when they've had it, it's the attendance has been very skewed towards sysadmins. So they kind of give you an idea of what kind of stuff they're targeting, but also they would like more developers and users. But this is the kind of stuff that they're aiming for.
Their bread and butter. Well, cool. Well, of course, we'll follow that as it gets closer and see how that goes. Maybe have some highlights from that in a future episode. And last but not least, of course, we want to mention there was some recent FreeBSD security advisories that came out yesterday evening, it looks like. So if you're on 9, 10, or any supported version of FreeBSD, you may want to go ahead and run FreeBSD update and get up to date on that.
So the first one, 14:16, is multiple vulnerabilities in the file command and the libmagic, which is what file uses. So what libmagic does is it can look at the first little bits of a file and tell what kind of file it is. Like, hey, that's an MP3, that's a JPEG, that's a disk image of UFS or whatever. But it turns out there's a flaw in the way it deals with composite document files or CDF files. And if someone were to construct a specifically designed one, it could cause an invalid pointer dereference or read out of bounds and cause problems. There's also one with the way the regular expression it uses for awk script detection uses multiple wildcards with unlimited repetitions. So that could, a specially crafted file there could basically make it consume all the CPU and RAM on your system until it crashes. And there's also specially crafted portable executable files can trigger an out-of-bounds read and cause problems. So there are 4 different problems in that one that could cause problems.
Important stuff to patch on your system.
There's no workaround, but if you don't have any users using the system, it's just you, and you don't use the file or the magic commands, then it's not that big of a deal, but you should probably patch anyway.
Be on the safe side.
Yeah, and this one's not a kernel patch, so it's easy. Doesn't require a reboot or anything.
So the next one, Icon V support, it looks like, for dealing with some additional languages.
Yes, this one only applies to FreeBSD 10 because Icon V was put into base in 10.
That looks like some null pointer dereferences. So again, patch your system for that. And then last but not least, we touched on this in the live interview today, but in a route, I noticed about some PCI IDS stuff which can affect Java on 10.x and cause some inconsistencies there, leading to crashes by the Java programs. So again, good stuff. You want to patch that, and that one's for 10.0 release and 10 stable. So try and grab that if you can, especially if you do anything Java related. Cool. And then let's see, that's about the end of the weekly news roundup. But last but not least, I'll mention we did release a PCBSD 10.02 image this last Monday. So that's out. That's our quarterly update. Includes all the latest GNOME, Cinnamon, KDE, all that good stuff, including the preview release of our Lumina desktop environment, which is being developed specifically on PCBSD. So if you'd like to take a look at that. Yeah, that's in there now, and this is also the release that includes Jelly support, where you can do a full disk encryption with Jelly and boot environments and not require a unencrypted /boot partition anywhere. So everything's encrypted, and you get boot environments, for free. So very cool stuff.
Definitely have to check that out.
Yeah, you take a look at that. Cool. Well, we'll be back in just a moment. Okay, first up in our weekly feedback and questions segment, we have a question from Maruf about jail networking. I'll go ahead and read this here, Alan, and we'll see what we can come up with. So he says he has a scenario where he has many VMs running FreeBSD. Each one of them has the same IP address but on separate VLANs. I was thinking if I can consolidate those VMs into one VM with more resources and create jails inside. What I want is the VM hosting the jails will have multiple NICs. So for example, EM0 for managing the main VM, EM1 assigned to VLAN 101, EM2 assigned to VLAN 102, and so forth and so on. let's say that EM0 is assigned with an IP 192.168.1.10. This is what I'll use to manage the main server and host jails. Now I'd like to be able to assign each jail connected to a dedicated network interface. Say, for example, EM1 will be dedicated to jail 1, which will have an IP of 10.10.10.1/24, jail 2, EM2 with the same IP, and so forth. So, of course, he says you may ask why I need this. The reason is for this is each of the jails will be dedicated to a specific network to provide some services, and this is for a training environment. So the VM is hosted in a VMware ESX environment. So any advice we can provide on how to solve this requirement? Any thoughts on that, Alan?
Normally, jails are meant to have a dedicated IP each, and so they don't get an interface. They get one IP or one or more IP addresses, and then they expose that IP address on that interface.
Sure.
So you won't be able to have the same IP address on multiple interfaces like that. You'd have to probably use the vimage stuff, and I have no experience with that.
I had done some basic playing with that like a year ago maybe, and it was still a little it was still kind of buggy at that point.
I think it mostly works as long as you're not trying to use PF.
Correct.
And it doesn't sound like he is, so that's definitely an option. With vimage, basically with vimage, each virtual machine actually has a virtual NIC inside of it that it can do everything with, and then you use the E-pair devices to assign those to your EM0, EM1, 2, 3, etc. And so you'd be able to do what you're after. And you create the VLAN inside the jail.
Looks like there's some vimage basic information on the wiki. I'm not seeing anything in the handbook yet. Just kind of searching for it here.
But yeah, in general with jails, you wouldn't be able to do that because of it doesn't have access to the raw interface. It just has the one IP address.
Could you do that in Beehive?
Yes, if you did Beehive, you could, but he's transitioning from one VM to another isn't really solving his problem per se.
Sure.
And he's basically the problem he's having is he has so much RAM, and if the way he's doing it now with 4 VMs is he's dividing that RAM into 4 chunks.
Sure.
Whereas if he puts it all one big thing and use jail, then whichever one of those jails needs more of the RAM will get it, kind of thing. Pool the resources, and that way you don't have a little bit wasted in each one. So I understand what you're trying to do, but yeah, keeping the same IP address on each of those is not something jails can do. With vimage, you can probably do it, but I don't know how.
Yeah, take a look into vimage support. And again, if you're somebody out there who's a vimage expert and have a good answer you want to pass along to them, send it in to us. We'll be happy to mention it.
We'd love to see
in a future episode. Yep, yeah. Cool. Okay, next up, question from Solomon. The title is FreeNAS. So he says, gentlemen, I just wanted to relay a FreeNAS story that took place earlier this week. I am a sysadmin for a small company. Money is scarce, so every dollar has to accomplish twice as much as the last. On a whim, I set up FreeNAS on an old Dell i5 with 2 2TB drives and 8 gigs of RAM. I wasn't expecting much since the hardware was rather old and crappy. I was looking for something to serve.
An i5 is old and crappy, but anyway.
Yeah. His definition of it, I suppose. He said he was looking for something to serve as a test bed for the backend for Bacula. So far, FreeNAS has bested everything we have thrown at it. The system has either beaten or tied other systems that have much better hardware. The biggest shock for me was when one of my drives reported he was getting consistently better performance out of the NAS than he was with Amazon Cloud offering. Oh, interesting. Oh, this is one of his devs, excuse me, not drives. According to him, the NAS wasn't necessarily faster than his cloud box. For him, FreeNAS was more consistent end-to-end with no slowdowns in between. Oh, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it depends what he was doing with Amazon Cloud. Like, obviously, having something on your LAN is faster than over the internet, but I think he just meant between the environments. Yeah.
So he says, I am pleasantly afraid of what would happen if we were to build a really FreeNAS solution or purchase something for IX. My poor little network would keel over from the strain. Well, hopefully not. But
the network is designed to handle gigabit.
Yeah, that's right. But he says he's now proud to declare that we are a Windows, Linux, and FreeBSD shop. Thanks for introducing me to FreeNAS and BSD. Well, that's great, Solomon. We're glad to hear about your success there, even just kind of throwing it on a system on a whim. It looks like it's exceeding your expectations.
Exactly. FreeNAS does a lot of good stuff.
It does, definitely. Okay, next up we have Silas asking about SSH chaining.
Yes.
So he says, this last week we talked about SSH commands to perform several jumps to SSH to your target. I was wondering if you know of any way to use this to encrypt a connection for a different application. So he's using a SOCKS 5 proxy as a jump for an RDP connection. Thanks for the good show. I'm a Linux user, but I find BSD enticing, and your show is a great doorway into that world.
Yeah, I think you can chain the two of them together. So if you do the SOCKS proxy on the machine where you're running the other application, and then just mix that in with the chaining. So you'd SOCKS proxy into SSH, and then that SSH would tunnel to the jump host and then to the destination, or through a series of hops, depending on how you want to do it. But yeah, you should be able to just put the SOCKS thing on the very first connection.
Cool. Okay, and last up we have Bert asking about port failures. So he says, I'm wondering if you can point me to a good guide or a few standard rules of thumb on how to resolve ports and package conflicts, or ports that failed to build. I had a few problems of that sort recently, and in the meantime I fixed them. Usually the solution was to reinstall the affected ports or wait until a proper patch arrived that made the ports buildable again. As a, I can empathize with that, by the way.
Yeah.
So as a seasoned FreeBSD user, it's probably a trivial topic, but for me, I could, even with some Google foo, not find a convincing standard advice on this topic.
I guess it depends what kind of conflict he was having. He didn't really specify. If it's, when you're using the package system, it works fairly well. Although when you want to switch from Perl 5.14 to 5.16, it's like you can't install 5.16 because you have 5.14. You can do pkg set -o for origin, and then you put the old one : new one, and it replaces all the dependencies, saying, hey, all this stuff, instead of Perl 5.14, it's now 5.16. But if you upgrade to the beta version of package, the 1.3, it's supposed to solve most of those conflicts for you.
Oh, great.
And yeah, that's coming along very nicely.
Well, one specific thing I would advise is try and use one or the other. I've had more difficulty when I mix the ports and packages. In other words, I have my package repo set up one way, and then I go and hand install some port, and all of a sudden, oh, flag's different. It has different dependencies. And then that just messes me up when I'm trying to do package updates.
Usually that's not that big of a deal, but yeah, the main one is that, if they're not from the same time, then the ports depending on something different, and yeah, if you do need to install something custom from ports, then you want to look at the package lock and package annotate, and basically that way when you do package upgrade to upgrade all your other stuff, it won't upgrade that custom port.
Touch that.
For my uses, I've switched to I have a machine with a lot of processors that I set up for Poudriere, and I just have a list of all the packages I want where I've into Poudriere entered all their custom options, and I just have my own package repo, and I just set it so it's higher priority. So when I would try to install something, it tries my package repo first, and if it's not there, then it falls back to the regular FreeBSD one, and I just keep that up to date and use it on all 100 of my servers, and it makes my life much easier. Poudriere is a great tool.
Definitely.
So he says he might be missing some obvious clues from the documentation, and he knows to look in the updating file. For most of those conflicts, the updating file will have the explicit commands on how to solve it. And he can check fresh ports is very nice, just to see what the commit message was and if there was a newer version of a port and so on.
I guess he says he's having build problems on some ports too.
Yeah.
We run into that a lot here because we're constantly running Poudriere and building stuff. And the way I solve that is by just looking at the SVN history.
Yeah.
And say, oh, somebody just updated this, and we roll it back for a day until they figure out what was wrong.
Usually stuff is pretty good once it gets in the tree.
Yeah.
Most of the people that work on ports run it through red ports first, and that makes sure that that it actually compiles and stuff. But there can be weird edge cases with versions of
especially
stuff
if you have a custom flag.
Yeah.
Like if you've set a flag that maybe they don't test or they didn't have built
or
with.
if you have a really old version of something installed and the port's like, well, you have some version of this, and I'm going to try to compile against it or whatever.
Yep. He's asking if there's a better algorithms resources on how to go about it, and maybe if we can make a small tutorial about it, if you think that would be useful, or point him to one if we know of one.
If you can email us back with a specific problem you ran into, we can maybe help you understand what that one was about.
Sure.
But yeah, it's it's hard to say, like, you know, a generic process that works every time something doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. So he says he's still following the show. Good stuff. Keep rocking. So we will. And again, yeah, send in any details you have on the specifics of that so we can look and say, oh, this is clearly what happened in this case.
Yep.
Okay, and that's our feedback and questions for the week. So as we're closing here, of course, we want to mention that all the tutorials are going to be posted in their entirety at bsdnow.tv. So check it out if you missed an episode or missed a tutorial. And just a reminder for those who don't check the website, you'll also find contact information for every guest we've ever had in the show notes. So if you have follow-up questions for a specific guest, you can go ahead and find that information there and contact them, get in touch. And of course, send your questions, comments, show ideas, topics, or stories you want mentioned on the show to feedback@bsdnow.tv. That's the address we monitor for all that stuff. Yep. And of course, we will try and answer all of your BSD questions.
So you have to send them first.
Yes, you do have to send them. We're not mind readers. So we're not reading your email like the NSA, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to come on for an interview or you have a tutorial you'd like to see, let us know so that we can try and work that in a future show. And of course, we do this live, so if you're available, we do it live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1800 UTC, yeah, so you're welcome
to something extra.
Yeah, and see some of the stuff that doesn't necessarily make it into the show, but we even try and answer questions on the air sometimes when people post stuff in IRC and whatnot. Yep. So it's a good way to interact with us.
And
before we...
Yeah, I was going to say, congratulations to Matt Ahrens, the newest FreeBSD committer.
That made me really happy to see, by the way.
Hopefully we'll see a bunch more ZFS stuff in the OpenZFS common repo starting to happen more. Mm-hmm. And his mentor is Kirk McCusick, so I'm sure he will get up to speed very quickly.
That's good stuff.
I guess TJ also has a note here that just the other day, I guess it would have been last Thursday, was FreeBSD's 21st birthday.
Yay,
so the FreeBSD project is now 21 years old.
Nice.
Which I guess means it's legally old enough to drink everywhere now.
That's right. Cool. Well, we look forward to seeing you guys next week. Really appreciate you following with us this week, and be back then. Have a safe week, guys. Whether you've got a single laptop or maybe a whole clusters of servers, keeping your systems up to date and patched is pretty much critical in today's day and age. Fortunately, it's pretty easy to do in most of the BSDs. So the tutorial today is going to show you how to keep both the base system and third-party applications up to date on both FreeBSD and OpenBSD. So go ahead and take it away, Alan. Let's start with FreeBSD.
In this week's tutorial, we're talking about updating your FreeBSD and OpenBSD system. By now, we've already taught you about the difference between release, stable, and current. But today we're going to be assuming that you're running a normal release branch and want to apply the security updates. So if we look, we can see this is a standard FreeBSD 10 system, and we want to update it because there's been some security updates. So we run Colin Percival's FreeBSD update with the fetch and install parameters. This will download all of the patches that haven't already been applied to the system and then install them. This is doing a binary update, so it doesn't require any compiling and it's very fast. As you can see, it's going to install the changed files and we're done. All you have to do is reboot to boot onto that new kernel, and we're now on a fully updated system. So that's all there is to it when you want to update minor versions. Now, if you want to upgrade between versions of FreeBSD, say from 9.2 to the new 9.3 when it comes out, you do FreeBSD-update upgrade and then indicate the version that you want to upgrade to. And that will take care of that. If you want to upgrade between major versions, for say 9.2 to 10, it's the same process, except because the version of the kernel, the major version of the kernel is changing, there are API changes, which means you need to update all of your packages. If you're using package ng, that's easy. Just a package upgrade -f will upgrade every package. And then that'll pull down the versions for 10 instead of 9. If you're doing ports, then you have to use port master or port upgrade or something to reinstall all your ports and compile them for the new version. Your other option is a source upgrade. The nice thing about a source upgrade is that it works for stable and current as well, because those are rapidly moving targets. So if we just do an SVN checkout here, we can download the source code. In this example, we're downloading base release engineering 10.0. So this is FreeBSD 10.0 plus security patches, the branch of FreeBSD maintained by the release engineering team. You can also choose, base/stable/10, and that'll download 10 stable, or whatever version you want. If you already have an SVN checkout, you just do SVN update, and it'll update your source tree. Once you're there, if you go to the user source directory, we can just do, if the update we're applying only affects the kernel, then we can just do make -j, and that how many processors you have. It'll use concurrent compiling to make it faster. Or if you look in the show notes, we show you how to do it automatically. You can just do a build kernel, and that will compile the kernel, and then make install kernel will install the kernel. I already compiled it earlier because it takes a couple of minutes. So now this will install the new kernel and all of the new modules. Then all you have to do is reboot, and you'll be on the new kernel. Then, optionally, you can upgrade the user land, depending on if the security advisory affects the user land, which most of them do. The process for that is very similar. Again, you just make -j whatever, build world, and that'll compile the world. That'll take a little while, usually on the order of 20 to 30 minutes, longer if you have a slower processor or fewer cores. Right, so if I just do make build world, and then make install world, then it'll update all of my stuff like top and PS and so on. And that's why it's important to install the new kernel and reboot onto it first, especially when you're doing a major version upgrade. For example, when you're going from 9 to 10, the structures that hold stuff for like netstat and top and PS might change, in which case the old tool won't work or the new tool won't work. So if you install the FreeBSD 10 version of top and you haven't rebooted onto a FreeBSD 10 kernel yet, you're still using a 9 kernel, then your top command won't work anymore. And that's not what you want. That's why you always install the kernel first, because they're backwards compatible but not forwards. And then when you're done, you can clean up by deleting the object directory, user obj, although that actually requires removing the immutable flag on some stuff first. But that's where all the temporary files. So when we did build world and build kernel, it built those into /usr/obj. And then when we installed, it copied those into our system. And we don't need those temporary files anymore, so we can get rid of those. And that, after another reboot, would be all you need to update your FreeBSD system, whether you were doing just a binary update with FreeBSD update or a full source build. And that's it for FreeBSD. And obviously, you have to update your packages separately with package ng upgrade, and then possibly -f if you need to force an update because you switched kernel versions. So next, we will show you how to do this on OpenBSD. Okay, so on OpenBSD, the process is kind of similar. We use FTP to download the source code. It'll be faster than doing a CVS checkout. Then we can use Signify to verify the signature on the files. And then we can use tar to extract those. Then, if we go to the user source directory, we can fetch one of the patches, say this one. So this is patch number 3 for the FTP client. And once that's downloaded, then we can take a look at it, and the OpenBSD patches will include the instructions on how to apply them in the patch. So if we take a look at the patch, we can see that this is the OpenBSD 5.5 errata number 3 from April 9th, 2014. The FTP client would fail to check the server hostname when connecting to a website over HTTPS. This means any site with a trusted CA signed certificate could impersonate any other website. So it explains the steps to install it. So now, if we just follow those steps, use the signify command to verify that our patch is a valid patch and installed. Once our patch is installed, we can switch into the subdirectory, user bin FTP. This is where the FTP client lives. And then if we make obj, that'll make the object directory. Make will actually compile the FTP command for us. And then make install will install that newly compiled FTP command. And then we can delete the patch and the object directory. And now we have the newer version of the FTP command installed. And so that particular flaw has been patched. If you need to upgrade the entire operating system, the process in OpenBSD is a bit different. What you do is you actually can download a new RAM disk, which is basically the new kernel and some utilities in a RAM disk, and you boot off of that, and then it gives you the option to do an upgrade. So if we just fetch that, and we can fetch the signature, and sign it, or use signify to verify it. And then we can see, now if we rebooted, we would get the installer-like menu and the option to upgrade our system, and it would update us with the latest version. And that's about all there is to it. There's also links in the show notes in the tutorial on how to do the OpenBSD upgrade guide, which allows you to look at ways to do this over SSH, since the RAM disk way requires a VGA console to complete the upgrade. And that's about it. Thank you for watching. See you next week.